Chapter 3. Sicily. Trnt and his companions journeyed until they reached the city of Nantes. When the Duke of Brittany heard that Trnt was coming with his relatives, he went out to welcome him with all the city magistrates and many knights, and they paid him the highest honor they could, for he had been the best knight of all those who had been at the festivities in England. The Duke feted him, and Trnt was held in high esteem by all the people in the land. One day, while Trnt was with the Duke and many other knights, relaxing and talking, two knights came from the King of France. The Duke asked if there was any news from the court, and they told him that Genoese had invaded the island of Rhodes, and that the Christians there were in need of help. The news had reached the King of France, and he had lamented loudly, but did very little. Then the knights left the court of the King of France and came to the Duke of Brittany. The Duke showed compassion for the Grand Master and the religious at Rhodes, and he told everyone there that he would send ambassadors to the King of France. Then, if the king wanted to send assistance to the Grand Master of Rhodes, and if he wanted to go as a captain, he would do it very willingly, and he would spend 200,000 crowns of his own money on it. The morning of the following day they chose 4 to be ambassadors, an archbishop, a bishop, a viscount, and Trnt Leblanc. When the ambassadors were before the King of France, they explained their mission, and he told them that in 4 days he would give them an answer. A month went by, and still they did not know what he intended to do. Finally, he told them that at the moment he could not intervene in these things because he was occupied with other matters that were more important to him. The ambassadors returned with the reply. When Trnt saw that so many Moors were on Rhodes and that no one was sending help, he talked to many sailors, asking if he could do something. They told him that if he could go, he could help them very much, and that he would not have to enter the castle at Rhodes from the dock, but would be able to go another way. Trnt bought a large ship and had it well stocked and armed. It happened that Trnt had become a good friend of the 5 sons of the King of France. The youngest of them, whose name was Philippe, was somewhat unlearned and was considered gauche, so the king thought very little of him, and no one ever spoke about him. A gentleman who served him, knowing that Trnt had a ship and was going to Rhodes and then to Jerusalem, wanted to go there very much, so he told Philippe, "My lord, knights who want their honor should not stay in their parents' home while they're young and able, especially if they are younger than their brothers, and their father ignores them. Think of that famous knight, Trnt Leblanc. After the great honor he received in the battles he won in England, he is now preparing a large ship to go to Rhodes into the Holy Land of Jerusalem. Oh, what glory it would be for you if you and I were leave here secretly, without saying a word to anyone until we were on the ship, 100 miles out to sea. And Trnt is such a virtuous knight that he will obey you and honor you as someone from your house deserves." "My good friend Tenebroso, I know that the advice you are giving me is good," said Philippe, "and I will be very happy if we can do it." "It seems to me," said the gentleman, "that I should go to Brittany first, to where Trnt is preparing the ship. We are such good friends that I will ask him to let me go along to the Holy Land of Jerusalem, and I'll ask him for what things will be needed for me and 2 squires. After we have his decision, we'll put everything we need on the ship." Philippe was very satisfied with this, and he said, "Tenebro, while you go to talk to Trnt, I'll get all the money I can, and jewels and clothing." The following day the gentleman left with the 2 squires, and Tenebro journeyed until he came to where Trnt was. They were very happy to see each other, and Tenebro told him the reason for his visit. Trnt was very highly pleased, for he knew that Tenebroso was a very valiant gentleman and very discreet, and he valued his company. He answered him, "My lord and brother, Tenebroso, my worldly goods, myself, the ship, and everything I have are at your service." When Tenebroso heard that Trnt say this, he was the happiest man in the world, and he gave many thanks to Trnt for his great gentility. He left one of his servants there to prepare a room inside the ship where they could eat and sleep, and where Philippe could stay secretly. Tenebroso set out again, riding until he was back with Philippe, who was waiting for him in great anticipation. Philippe was very pleased at Trnt's answer. Tenebroso told him to get ready to leave, and Philippe said that he had already had everything he needed to take. The following day Philippe went to his father, the king, and in the queen's presence he begged him to allow him to go to Paris to see the fair, which was 2 days' journey from there. The king told him coolly, "Do whatever you like." He kissed his hand, and then the queen's hand. They set out on their journey very early in the morning, and finally they reached the seaport. Philippe slipped into a room on the ship without letting anyone see him. When the ship had weighed anchor and they were 200 miles out to sea, Philippe revealed his presence to Trnt. Trnt was very surprised at this, but because they were so far out to sea, they had to continue on their course towards Portugal, and they arrived at the city of Lisbon. When the King of Portugal learned that Philippe, son of the King of France, was on the ship, he sent a knight who graciously begged him to come ashore to rest from the long sea voyage. Trnt and Philippe, dressed in their finery, accompanied by many knights and gentlemen who had come with Trnt, they left the ship and went to the palace. When the king saw Philippe, he embraced him and paid him great honor, and did the same to the others. They remained in the king's court 10 days. When they decided to leave, the king had them fill the ship with everything they needed. From there, Trnt sent a gentleman to the King of France with letters explaining what had happened to his son. When the King of France learned that his son was in such good company, he was very pleased, and the queen was especially happy, because so much time had passed with him knowing nothing that they thought he was either dead or had entered some monastery. Philippe took his leave of the King of Portugal, and the ship set sail, reaching the Cape of St. Vincent to pass through the Straits of Gibraltar. There they encountered many Moorish vessels, and when they saw the ship, all the vessels went into formation. They attacked it fiercely, and the combat lasted half a day, with many men from both sides dying. After Trnt's men had rested, they renewed the battle, and it was very fierce. Now Trnt's ship was much larger and lighter than any of those of the Moors, but it was alone, while they were 15 of the others, large and small, and all of them carried weapons. One very able sailor on the ship, named Catequesfaras, had sailed a great deal, and he was very clever and valiant. When he saw that the situation was taking a turn for the worse, he took many ropes from the ship and made a net. He placed those ropes from stern to prow and around the mast, and he put them up so high that the men did not find their weapons hindered in any way. Instead, it kept them from being taken prisoner. For the missiles that the Moors launched were so many and so thick that it was a great marvel to see, and if the ship had not been covered by the net of ropes, it would have been completely filled with stones and iron bars. In that way it was protected so that no stone could pass through it. Instead, when a stone hit against the rope, it bounced into the sea. What else did the sailor do? He took up all the mattresses that he found on the ship, and he covered the forecastles and the sides of the ship. As the missiles fell on top of the mats, they could not damage the ship. And he did still more. He took boiling oil and tar, and when the ships drew alongside, they threw the oil and boiling tar with the ladles, causing grave injuries to the Moors, who had to draw apart from the ship. But still they passed through the entire Straits of Gibraltar, fighting night and day. There were so many missiles, darts, and spikes that the sails were pinned to the ship's mast when the Moors left them. They were very near land, and certain that the ship would run aground, stern first, near the city of Gibraltar. But the sailors were so capable that they quickly put the ship around and raised the sails. Then they passed out of the straits and entered the great sea. Philippe, Trnt, and many of the others were wounded in these battles. They went to the deserted island near the land of the Moors, and there they tended to their wounds and repaired the ship as well as they could. Then they sailed along the Barbary coast, where they fought many battles with the Genoese and Moorish vessels until they were close to Tunis. There they decided to go to the island of Sicily to take on wheat. They went to the port of Palermo, where the knight and king were, with their 2 sons and very beautiful daughter named Rucomana, a very intelligent maiden of many virtues. When the ship was in port, they made a scribe disembark along with 5 or 6 men with orders to tell no one about Philippe or Trnt, but rather to say that the ship had come from the west and was on its way to Alexandria with some pilgrims who were going to the Holy Sepulchre. When the king learned that they had come from the west, he had the scribes from the ship and all the others called before his majesty so he could have news of those lands. Before the king, they told about the great battles they had had with the Moors and the Genoese in the Straits of Gibraltar. And forgetting at that moment Trnt's words, they mentioned that Philippe, son of the King of France, was there in the company of Trnt Leblanc. When the king heard that Philippe was on the ship, he had a great wooden bridge covered with cloth and satin constructed from land to the ship, and to pay him honor the king went on board the ship with his 2 sons and implored Philippe and Trnt to come on land and rest a few days from the great hardships they had endured at sea and from their battles with the Moors. Philippe and Trnt thanked him and told him that, to please him, they would go with his majesty. The king brought them to the city, furnished them with very nice quarters, and had them served excellent dishes and other things men need who have been at sea. Philippe, following Trnt's counsel, told the king that they would not stay in their room until they had seen the queen. The king was very pleased. When they were upstairs in the palace, the queen, along with her daughter, the princess, received them very graciously, and when they returned to their lodgings, they decided that she was everything a king's daughter should be. Afterwards, every day at mass or after eating, they were with the king, and especially with the Infantata, who was so pleasant to the foreigners who came and went that everyone spoke of her great virtue. And by speaking with the Infantata every day at the king's court, Philippe grew very enamored of her, as she did of him. But Philippe was so shy when he was in her presence that he dare scarcely speak. And when she asked him questions, he did not know how to respond to some of them. Trnt quickly answered for him and said to the Infantata, "Oh, my lady, what a thing love is, that Philippe! When we are in our lodgings or away from here, his lips never tire of praising your majesty. And when you are present, he is overcome with love and finds it difficult to speak. In truth, I tell you, if I were a woman and found someone with his genteel quality, and I knew he was of a long and good lineage, I would forget everything else and would love only him." "Oh, Trnt," said Infantata, "your words sound nice, but if it turns out he is vulgar by nature, what pleasure would it be for a maiden to have everyone laugh at him? For love's sake, don't tell me such things. I would prefer a man who is prudent and discreet, rather than for him to be vulgar and avaricious." "My lady," said Trnt, "you are right, but he doesn't fit that description. He's young and of tender years, but he's old in the best sense, generous, more valiant than anyone, and very amiable and gracious. During the night he gets up and he doesn't let me rest the way I would like. If I want to give him pleasure, I have only to speak of your majesty. If this isn't love, tell me, what could it be? My lady, love someone who loves you. He is the son of a king, like you, and he loves you more than his life. If he does not talk as much as your grace would like, that is a virtue. Guard yourself, my lady, from those men who boldly dare to court a maiden. That kind of love is not a good love. It comes and it goes, and men like those are called corsairs because they make booty of everything. My lady, give me a man who appears before his lady with a great fear and shame, with his hands trembling, and who can scarcely utter a word." "Trnt," said the Infantata, "because of your great friendship with Philippe, you are right to honor him so much. With your noble order of chivalry, you can do nothing but what is expected of you, and that's why I think highly of you. But don't imagine that I am a woman who is easily convinced. I have to put my hands in up to the elbows in the sense of knowing his manners, his station and condition, and if he could bring me happiness. Although I'm happy when I see him, experience tells me that he seems vulgar and avaricious, and both of those vices are incurable. I beg your highness to give me an audience, and not to be angry at what I say to you. I see ambassadors from the Pope coming to court to arrange a marriage between your highness and his nephew, and some wonder if he isn't his son. And I also see ambassadors from the King of Naples, the King of Hungary, and the King of Cyprus. Although I may not have the power of the most Christian King of France, I would like to talk to your father and your highness about the wedding. I see that you are wise and discreet, my lady, but because of your perfection you deserve to be on the imperial throne and subject to the crown of France. It is of greater height than the Roman Empire." At this time the queen arrived and interrupted their delightful conversation. After a few moments the queen said to Trnt, "Virtuous knight, scarcely an hour ago the king and I were speaking of you and your chivalrous deeds, and the king wishes to place an undertaking in your charge that is very important to him and to me. And I regard you so highly that if you attempt it, you will surely come out of it with an honor. But to avoid all doubts, I will put forth all the obstacles there that I can." "My lady," said Trnt, "your excellency speaks in such a covert manner that I don't know what to reply, unless your highness can give me a clearer explanation. But whatever I can do for you, your excellency, with the consent of the king, I'll do it most willingly, even if it should be to carry the cross on my back."